Scientists are warning that insect species are declining and vanishing at an alarming rate. Yet most of us seem to be very happy to completely ignore their plight. Today, I'm going to talk about the global insect decline, what is driving it, and why you, me, and all humans should be extremely concerned about the plummeting insect numbers. It's really hard to get people to rally around insects. You know, if they see a live stream of a giraffe or a panda being born in some zoo, people go crazy with excitement. If they see images of koalas being burned in Australian fires, everyone starts crying and they go out of their way to try to help them, as they should, as they absolutely should. But when we're talking about insects, on the other hand, when we're seeing reports that insects are going extinct at an alarming rate, much faster than even vertebrates, everyone's kind of like, meh, so what? Nobody pays attention. And it's like they couldn't care less about what happens to insects. I think part of the problem is that they are perceived as a nuisance, and they can also be kind of scary. Like if you look at a fly or a damselfly with a macro lens, they literally look like an alien monster. And some of them behave weird too. Like sometimes a mantis eats the body of her mate after mating. So they mate, then she bites his head off and eats his body to nourish herself. So I understand how insects are very different from us, and it can be harder for us to relate to them or to care about them. When I posted on ENDGAME 2050's Instagram that insects are declining, I received comments saying things like, very nice, and it's about damn time. So it's like some people were cheering the fact that insects are going extinct. Like it's some great accomplishment that humans are achieving to get rid of them. But the thing is that even if you don't like insects, even if you hate them, and even if you're afraid of them, what you should really be terrified of is that we're losing them, because insects are the base of the ecosystem which supports our lives. As Dr. Dave Goulson from the University of Sussex put it, insects are at the heart of every food web. They pollinate the large majority of plant species, keep the soil healthy, recycle nutrients, control pests, and much more. Love them or loathe them, we humans cannot survive without insects. We humans cannot survive without insects, he says. I think that's a very important quote to reflect on, because if our fate is tied to the fate of insects, then shouldn't we be paying very close attention to what's happening to them? It turns out insects have been plummeting in the last few decades in a pretty ridiculous and frightening way. A recent study out of Germany reported that in the last 27 years, there has been a 75% decline of flying insects. 75% of the flying insect biomass gone in 27 years. That is quite a decline. And it's not just in Germany that insects are in a free fall. For example, scientists found that in the Puerto Rico rainforest, 80% of the insects in the leafy canopy have vanished since the 1970s. And that insect numbers in the dry forest in Mexico fell by 80% since the 1980s. If you look at just the numbers for butterfly species that exist in farmlands in England, you'll be horrified to find out that butterfly species there fell by 58% between the years 2000 and 2009. A 58% decline in just 9 years. And it's not that England has some wicked magic spell against butterflies that's causing them to die exclusively there. It's just that they're measuring them. So when countries spend the resources and time to measure insect populations, they're finding out that most of them are declining everywhere. In fact, a landmark study on all of the insects around the world, published in the Journal of Biological Conservation, found that the total mass of insects is falling by a precipitous 2.5% a year, suggesting they could vanish within a century. Imagine that. I know falling by 2.5% per year may not sound like a lot, but it is, because mathematically, as the researchers mentioned, a 2.5% rate of annual loss means in 10 years you will have a quarter less insects, in 50 years only half left, and in 100 years you will have none. You heard that correctly. Scientists are warning that insects, which are the most abundant animals on the planet, are headed towards extinction, threatening a catastrophic collapse of nature's ecosystems. Insects have unique and essential ecological functions, from recycling the nutrients of dead animals and dead plants back into the soil to controlling pests. And so their numbers, the amount of insect mass present, matters a great deal for the ecosystem services they provide. But I want to bring your attention to just two particular functions insects have that has to do with food. One is providing a food base. So insects themselves are the food base for many other animals, like birds, bats, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and even some mammals. Their role in the food chain is extremely important because these systems would collapse if insect populations are gone. If there are no insects, there's no birds, no reptiles, no amphibians, etc. In other words, if this food source is taken away, all these animals starve to death. The second and perhaps most important issue for people watching this video who presumably like to eat is that insects indirectly also feed humans, because insects pollinate plants that we humans use for food.
Pollinators help to produce 75% of our different crop species. That's how important they are to our diet, as well as things we really like chocolate. Many people don't know that cacao, which chocolate comes from, is pollinated by a tiny fly. Without that tiny fly, we wouldn't have chocolate. Personally, I think that would be a catastrophe.
That was a clip from the environmental documentary ENDGAME 2050, which is available for free on this YouTube channel. And now I want to show you another clip.
And people ought to care about biodiversity only if they like to eat, or if they like to be healthy.
The point Dr. Ehrlich is trying to make is that biodiversity, which includes insects, is not just nice to have. We literally depend on it for our survival. The ecosystems of the planet need the services of other species, including insects, to function, which is why scientists are so forceful in the language they use to describe the current insect situation. Dr. Sanchez Bayo from the University of Sydney said, if insect species losses cannot be halted, this will have catastrophic consequences for both the planet's ecosystems and for the survival of mankind. Dr. Dave Goulson of Sussex University said, we appear to be making vast tracts of land inhospitable to most forms of life and are currently on course for ecological Armageddon. If we lose the insects, then everything is going to collapse. Since none of us want a catastrophic collapse of ecosystems, let's look at why insects are going extinct and what we can do about it. One of the main reasons they are going extinct is the exact same reason why so many other animals are going extinct, and it's simply habitat loss. They go extinct because we have taken and continue to take an obscene amount of wildlands and turn them into farmlands. In the other video I did recently entitled Humanity's Land Grab Disaster, I talked about how 1,000 years ago, only 4% of the planet's habitable land was used for farming. But now we're using at least 50% of the planet's habitable land for farming. To be clear, farming is not the only activity we do that uses land on the planet. There's urbanization, there's roads, and many other things. But just farming alone, just this one activity we do alone, already occupies 50% of the planet's habitable area. And as the scientists say, farmland has very little to offer for any wild creature. So, just like other animals who are going extinct because they lose their habitats, it turns out agriculture is the main driver of the declines with regards to insects too. Another important factor that is not surprisingly also harming insects is the widespread use of pesticides. I think the cause and effect relationship here is pretty obvious. I mean, it's pretty expected that dosing landscapes with strong toxic chemicals would be dangerous for insects and probably for a lot of other things as well. On this issue, a chief scientific advisor to the UK government warned that regulators around the world have falsely assumed that it is safe to use pesticides at industrial scales across landscapes, and that the effects of dosing whole landscapes with chemicals have been largely ignored. So not surprisingly at all, it turns out that dosing entire landscapes with toxic chemicals was a pretty terrible idea. Urbanization and climate change are also significant factors killing insects. And I think it's easy to see how that would be the case. If farmlands don't have much to offer for insects, then pavement and cement wouldn't either. Make no mistake, this is not really about the insects, or it's not just about them. It's 100% about you too. Your family, your children, you're having a livable planet with a functioning ecosystem. Pesticides are not helping the insect situation. So if you can, and when you can, please choose organic and avoid using pesticides. We talked about how insects are being decimated because they are losing their habitat. Well, according to the United Nations, animal agriculture is the #1 user of land on the planet, and it is the leading driver of deforestation in the world. Eating animal foods is a very inefficient way of feeding ourselves, because producing them uses a lot more land, energy, and water than does producing plant-based foods. One of the reasons for that is that animals eat more food than they produce. According to scientists from the University of Minnesota's Institute on the Environment, of all the calories we invest in raising animals for food, we only recover a fraction, on average about 12%, in the form of meat, dairy, and other animal products. So it's no surprise that feeding our human population of almost 8 billion people with a diet that includes animal foods is resulting in an environmental disaster of epic proportions. Ditching animal foods is something we can all do starting today in our very next meal. And it also happens to be very healthy. Even Harvard School of Public Health acknowledges that a plant-based diet is the optimal diet for living a long and healthy life. And look, if you have even Olympic athletes like Kendrick Faris, who is vegan and represented the US in weightlifting, or vegan ultramarathon runners like Scott Jurek, who broke the record for running the 2,000-mile Appalachian Trail. The 2,000-mile Appalachian Trail. If they have no problems finding the calories and protein to nourish their ridiculously athletic lives, then I think regular folks like you and me, who are not Olympic athletes or anything close, you and I can absolutely go vegan too. Last but definitely not least, there is a glaring issue that we are completely ignoring to the detriment of both humans and nature.
The number of people on the planet would not matter if we were ethereal beings. What matters is the combination of the number of people and their economic activity, namely consumption and waste products.
Our species, modern humans, has been around for around 200,000 years. And it took us all that time to reach a population of 1 billion, which we finally did very recently in the early 1800s. But today, only about 200 years after that, we have multiplied 8 times over. We're now almost 8 billion humans and on track to hit close to 10 billion by the year 2050. Today, humanity is no longer living sustainably, and that is a vast understatement. We're not just not living sustainably, we are literally co-opting nature and its resources for ourselves at the expense of destroying the foundational ecosystems that support us, while driving the annihilation of countless other species in the process. For example, biologists have classified our time as the 6th mass extinction in Earth's history, because so many species are going extinct, mostly because they're losing their habitats from our massive footprint. And as I mentioned before, just one of our activities, just agriculture, already uses up 50% of all the habitable land on the planet. Yet, unfazed and unafraid, we continue growing our population as if there was no problem. And not just by a little bit, we are having a net growth of over 80 million people per year. That's more than the entire population of the United Kingdom. So it's like every year we're adding an additional United Kingdom load of people to the planet, year after year after year. That obviously affects everything, from increased urbanization to increased habitat loss. All of these environmental issues are getting worse as we continue to relentlessly grow our population like that. And it doesn't seem like insects or wildlife in general stand a chance if we continue to grow like that. Scientists tell us that we have depleted 90% of large ocean predators since the year 1950. 90% of large ocean predators who lived on this planet for millions of years, long before humans even existed, now almost completely decimated by humans in just 70 years. And what do we do in response to that? We continue growing our population by more than a new United Kingdom every year. Scientists tell us that we are projected to deplete ocean fisheries by the middle of this century, because it turns out humanity's appetite for seafood, multiplied by 8 billion people, is depleting the ocean's fisheries. And what do? We keep growing our population by more than a new United Kingdom every year. Scientists tell us that today many countries are using up their underground water reserves, and that it's projected that by 2050, more than half of the world's population will not have adequate access to fresh water. And what do? We keep growing our population of people who all need water by more than a new United Kingdom every year. Scientists tell us animals are suffering because of our waste, and the UN warns that pollutants like plastic, heavy metals, and pesticides are also affecting and even killing humans as well. And what do? We keep growing our population of consumers by more than a new United Kingdom every year. Scientists tell us that our topsoil, which is needed to grow food, is being eroded into dirt, which doesn't grow food. We are eroding our soil due to our intensive farming practices, which have been adopted as the pressure to produce ever more food to feed so many of us has intensified. And the United Nations tells us that there may only be 60 years of farming left because of how we are degrading the soil. 60 years of farming left because of how we are squeezing the soil to the limit. And what do? We keep growing our population of people who all need food by more than a new United Kingdom every year. We humans like to pride ourselves in that we're such a smart species. But while we have made great strides in different areas, like going to the moon or inventing smartphones and technology, we apparently have a huge blind spot when it comes to just looking at the big picture and acknowledging something that's so obvious and undeniable. The fact that we are vastly overpopulated and it's hitting us everywhere. And of course, it's hitting the other species with whom we share the planet as well.
So I think that the silence around population has to be broken, and people have to speak out about the relationship between population and environment. There is something we can do to slow population growth, and it will have drastic benefits for access to resources, access to land, access to water, food security, and clean air, stable climate. All of that's affected by population. It will be much easier to manage these challenges if we can slow and stabilize population growth than if we continue in business as usual path.
I believe that any efforts to help address our population problem should promote and respect human rights. All we have to do is simply reduce our birth rates. In other words, have less children. So please support in whatever ways you can gender equality and women's rights around the world, as well as access to education and family planning. And please support the abolition of horrid practices like child marriages. All of these issues are fundamental human rights that are critically important in their own right. But they also happen to be some of the most impactful actions we can take to help slow and stabilize our population growth. Another important action to help reduce birth rates is simply raising awareness about the situation in which we find ourselves. I believe that people would decide to have fewer children if they knew and understood the severity of the impact our overpopulation is having on the planet, on the ecosystems on which we and other species depend. So please keep the planet in mind when planning your own family size. Remember, we are currently in a severe environmental overshoot, and having a small family or even having no children or adopting is one of the most impactful ways to reduce your environmental footprint, especially if you live in a first world country like the US, where every child has such a correspondingly huge environmental footprint, but everywhere in general as well. To state the obvious directly, the natural world would benefit enormously right now if people had fewer children. I think this is pretty undeniable and self-evident. Do we have it in our human brains to have foresight and motivation to make changes in our lives and our behaviors so that we stop destroying the planet? Or are we doomed to just keep doing what we're doing and ruin everyone's chance for a future, including the insects and including ourselves? I don't know the answer to that, but time, of which we are rapidly running out, will surely tell. That is why the tagline of my environmental documentary ENDGAME 2050 is "Humanity's last chance is now." It's meant to be literal. If you haven't already, I invite you to watch the 90-minute environmental documentary I produced. I showed you a few pieces of it in this video, but the full film is free to watch right here on YouTube, and the link is below. It's also available on Amazon Prime and on our website endgame2050.com. What are your thoughts on the insect decline and all of this mess? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I always look forward to reading your comments and getting your feedback. If you think this information is important, please like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe so you can stay in the loop with upcoming videos. If you click on the bell, YouTube will notify you when I upload the next one. Until next time, thank you so much for watching and please take care.